Francesco, let's start with I love looking at these images, so let's start with the motif of the seashell, which is really one of the great forms in art. It's the spiral, it's the inside out, it's all kinds of Fibonacci series of numbers. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that symbol means to you and how it functions in these watercolors?
A trigger could be an interview, the last interview Levi-Strauss gave when he was in his 90s. After studying human endeavor for a lifetime, he said that all he was left with was the impression you would receive if you looked at an empty seashell and you looked at the iridescence on the shell. And so the only memory that was left with him was the memory of some artifacts and of their grace.
Beautiful, beautiful. There's also, well, in addition to the symbolism in Hinduism and Buddhism and practically every world religion, there's also the sound element. I mean, the seashell, the conch shell is possibly the first musical instrument. There's an oral quality to it, and I know that's important to you in your work, isn't it?
Of course, all of these things don't come to mind when I make the work, but yes, it is absolutely true that the seashell is also the conch that the ascetic plays. And is also the conch that was in when Joseph Beuys designed his own grave. He put the symbols and the shell to signify the breath. So breathing is the first music, is the first manifestation of creation, if you want.
Mm. And you put the dates in all of these?
I may do that for the rest of my life. This big intrusive dates. Maybe another trigger for this could have been that in the last year I've been looking at ukiyo-e, is that how you say? The Japanese prints, which are always filled with intrusions and bits of writing and all kind of sections that are patched into the image, and they create a disturbance, but I'm kind of attracted by this.
It's a big help to art historians. I mean, the Zervos catalog is marvelous for that reason. In fact, the letters of Van Gogh as well, because you can really get down to within a couple of days of when something was done. It's a big help to us.
Well, I've also been fascinated by that when I saw it in other artists, and when you see how much they could do in a few number of days.
Yes.
So,
but
it's an aspiration.
Yes.
To write down the dates.
I also thought it might have something to do with the diaristic meaning of these moments, the exigency of this moment, that you're somehow marking these days.
Yes, but the reason I said maybe I'll do it for the rest of my life is that I'm very keen on not accepting that these days are any different than the days that came before and the days that will follow. I think only the nature of our awareness has shifted, but the situation is exactly the same from the beginning to the end. It's always the same.
That's
but we won't go into that.
But your life has changed in these days, has it not, or not really? And in many ways, I think of you in the early days in Italy, in the world of art de pauvre, and I think of you in India, where you were working in a very monastic way with very few materials. And I think of all the artists I know, probably your life has changed the least right now.
an eccentric friend of mine who is sort of a mystic, he always says, no more beginnings, meaning no more, meaning a lot of different things, but meaning also no interruptions. One should just be like water, just flowing, and without this crutches of a beginning, an ending, a completion, an ambition. No, it would be better just to flow. Yeah.
Did you make these works at home? Are you still going to your studio?
Yes, I'm going to the studio on in a very system. I have a protocol with my assistant so that we are both isolated from each other, but I do go to the studio, and in my studios where I make more complex work, larger paintings. And so we have a protocol that we figured out very, very early in this last months. But the watercolors are made on McDougal Street, yes, where I live.
Yeah, yeah.
And the images are images of the shells, but there are also toys that are floating out of the ocean into the shore. And actually, the image that I had in mind was the image of where the water touches the land. What do you call it? Just a line of separate the shore, but it's like the equivalent of twilight, the equivalent, a place that where the line is blurred, the line is not so defined, a place in between, which has always been a subject, maybe the subject of what I make.
Yes, yes.
The space in between, the gap between identities, the gap between stylistic solutions, the gap between soft and harsh.
And between the body and the outside world?
The gap between the body and the inner world and the outer world.
I remember Gelek Rinpoche once talking about the bardo, and he said there are millions of bardos. There's a bardo between two moments. There's a bardo between two thoughts. I thought that was an interesting perception.
And before him, Trungpa Rinpoche, he said that consciousness can be described as continuity of discontinuity. So to familiarize oneself with that sense of, with that gap, with that break, is can be a goal of our life.
Yes, I remember as a child being at the beach and watching the waves come in and noticing how each wave made a very thin line on the shoreline, which was then erased by the next wave.
Yes.
I'm fascinated by those lines. Did
Yes.
you have that experience?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, and it's quite it's a very vivid image that you're giving me, which I think it has a lot to do with drawing per se. And oops, I lost you.
Okay.
Can
Well,
hear me?
did you? Yes, I can hear you fine. I can't see you. Did you touch something?
No, I didn't touch anything at all.
All right.
Okay, I'm back. I'm back. We are back. We are back. No, it's a very vivid image that you're giving me with this line on the shore, because in a way it reminds me of the way I look at drawing, where when you make drawings, when you make lines in drawings, in painting, there is the literal line, the line you make, but also using that line, you're also suggesting other lines. The lines are not dogmatic. They're more like, there is an element of drawing that is like overtones, lines that suggest lines that they're not really there, but they are.
And I imagine in watercolor, you're actually recreating that experience of an aqueous edge to things.
yes, the balance between control and how would you call it, pronunciation.
Yes. What else is going on in the studio? What else? What are you working on? Some large scale paintings?
So I'm working on the watercolors here at home, and in the studio I've been working again with milk paint. I've been making some paintings with using the paint that you find on shaker furniture.
Yes, Casey.
I love that. I like casing. Yeah, I love that surface. And
Yeah, it's very chalky.
it's
It's
a
a
chalky. It's a chalk, and it's very serene. It's a very serene surface, which somehow I think goes well with this present here.
yes, and the palette is a green one as well. You don't really get colors, do you?
It's a pastel palette, so all the colors are broken. They're not. Again, is a little bit for color what I was describing for drawing. The blue is a blue, but is also a gray. The red is a red, but is also something else. All the colors are a little bit in between colors.
Right, right. I've noticed when you that your life as an artist, observing it over the years, it seems like although there are periods of rest, mostly you rest from one body of work to the other. You refresh yourself by changing media and switching into another mode of making rather than just stopping. Is that a fair comment?
Yes, everything I make belongs to this collection. It's almost as if I am an archaeologist and I find new forgotten cities, forgotten underground space painted caves, forgotten shipwrecks. I go
Yeah.
from one finding to another,
Yes.
And every new find in a way is liberating from the one before. I feel liberated. I can leave whatever I made before behind me. It doesn't make my audience it doesn't make my the life of my audience easy, because you embrace a certain body of work that I'm making, and then I leave it behind and I do something other. So it is difficult. I'm getting used to the fact that I can't expect everyone to follow me everywhere.
Right.
Finally, I'm accepting that.
Right.